Deus Ex, a game whose name is a shortened version of the old Latin phrase Deus Ex Machina.
Deus Ex Machina.
Literally translating to God from the machine. It's a mechanism where a seemingly unsolvable problem is suddenly resolved by a divine intervention. Perhaps maybe God himself came down to solve the problem. But now in a play on words, when we say God from the machine, the game Deus Ex takes it a bit literally.
Aquinas spoke of the mythical city on the hill. Soon that city will be a reality, and we will be crowned its kings. Not better than kings. Gods.
Throughout the entire game's universe, you have humans who have augmentations, which are robotic appendages or additions to their body, either for survival purposes or to enhance their abilities, to almost make them superhuman. The most recent game, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, takes place in the year 2029, and at this point in time in the game's story, augmentations have already been around for quite some time, and they appeared as a way to improve the lives of humans. Much like our main character here, Adam Jensen, has these augmentations for survival purposes. And if he's able to perform maybe some superhuman acts, that is the icing on the cake for him. Now, I'm not gonna lie, from a sci-fi perspective, we know that science fiction can often manifest itself in the real world today. Anybody who was alive in the 60s or 70s, if they see the world now and that we can take handheld devices in our pockets and order pizza from it, or order shipments through a store called Amazon and have it delivered by drone, these are all things that were originally science fiction, and here they are reality today. So with that in mind, is it possible that Deus Ex augmentations could be possible at one point in time? So before I answer that question, you have to look at it in this perspective. These augmentations already exist. We have contact lenses to help you with your vision. We have prosthetic arms and prosthetic legs for amputees. We even have pacemakers and insulin pumps for those who are diabetics. So in some capacity, these augmentations do exist, but they're not in Deus Ex style. They're not quite as sophisticated. But the question is the level of sophistication that they exhibit. Will that be possible one day? Will this become a thing? And the answer to that is no. Even though, in my opinion, technologically, we will be able to pull something like this off, perhaps maybe even by the year 2029 when this game takes place. The main reason why it'll never be commercially available and available to the masses of people is because of the system of healthcare that we have, not just here in the US, but all around the world. Now, I want to preface this by saying most of my career experience has been in health policy and in the healthcare system here in the United States. And I do see the limitations of the system that we have. I wouldn't particularly call this bias on my part, but this is what I have observed throughout my entire time working in this industry. Let's begin with what is our healthcare system. Here in the United States, there are two main groups that pay for healthcare. It is the private insurance companies and the government. And if in case you know anything about insurance, regular citizens are usually employed. And if they're employed full-time, the government mandates that their employer buys them health insurance. And how health insurance works, they take the money from the people who don't use healthcare and they apply it to pay for services given to those who do use it. Now, traditionally, young people don't use a lot of healthcare, but they still pay into the plan. And older people traditionally use a lot more healthcare because you have more health problems the older you get. So in a sense, the younger populations within an insurance group are going to subsidize the costs for older people in the group. This goes very similar to how government operates on its health insurance system, which here in the United States is Medicare, funded by the federal government, and Medicaid, funded by the state governments. Now, keep with me. This is all very important when it comes to whether or not these augmentations will ever happen. The way that these insurance have worked up until around the year 2010 was it's called fee for service. Meaning that if a doctor or a nurse or a pharmacist performs a particular service for your health, they bill for that particular service and your insurance is going to pay them Now, of course, this led to a lot of abuses later on in the 90s, especially when you saw that doctors were ordering services that you might not have needed. Sometimes you were getting an x-ray when you didn't need one, and the insurance company or the government would just pay the money out to the doctors. But now, more recently, the healthcare system is moving towards an evidence-based system. You might see this as value-based, but what is evidence? Evidence is where, in a medical system, they find a bunch of people with all these certain characteristics and group them together. And they decide, we're going to do a diabetes study on diabetics, and we're going to try this particular drug in all of them. And of course, it's voluntary whether or not one of those people wants to join that study. They get free drugs and they get free monitoring, so why not? And what they do to that entire group of people who all have similar characteristics, they're going to group them into 2 or 3 different parts. So they might try drug A in one group and drug B in another group, and then chuck the results between the two. And in the case of diabetes, they would look for blood sugar levels. So for example, if drug A at the end of treatment gives the first group a lower blood sugar level, which is considered good in the case of diabetes, versus drug B, whose patients had a higher blood sugar level at the end, then we have evidence now that drug A is probably more efficacious or works a little better in reducing blood sugar levels than drug B. And what's done with that information is it can be presented to insurance companies or it could be presented to the government. And they might say that drug A is better than drug B, and the people making drug A can cut a discount to insurance companies and the government, and will save them X amount of dollars. Because if the diabetes is left untreated, you have other problems like a potential risk for stroke, a potential risk for heart attacks, or even amputating limbs, which all come with diabetes. And because this one drug A works better than drug B, you'd be saving money in preventing heart attacks, preventing strokes, and possibly preventing amputations as well. So now we have evidence that A is better than B, and we're going to force the doctors to use drug A in patients. Otherwise, we're not going to pay them. That's from the insurance perspective. So keep in mind, while drug A might work best in a group of diabetics, what might work best for you is actually medicine B, because you might not fit the demographics of anybody in group A. For example, if group A is old white guys and you happen to be a young black girl, well, I don't know how well drug A is going to work for you. It might not work for you as well as it did for all of the people in that group. But regardless, in an evidence-based system, you're forced to go with A first, and only after you try A, then do you possibly get B. So any of this rhetoric that comes out that says that we're looking for individualized based medicine, the system that we're actually moving towards is anything but. Now, with that being said, our healthcare system here in the United States is extremely reactive. We know that 5% of users consume about 50% of the costs, and about a quarter of the Medicare, which is the government-sponsored healthcare payments, is used up by people in the last year of their life. And if we look at the Medicare budget, we're looking at upwards of $600 billion a year. If you want to compare this to video games is $23 billion a year right now. So now the reason that this is a problem, our healthcare system, is because right now we're way too busy with the problems of today. And to think of things for the future is almost an afterthought at this current point in time. This comic that I found earlier sums up the mentality of people in healthcare right now. All right, so now that we've defined what is our healthcare system, now let's ask who is in our healthcare system. So the main drivers of healthcare are doctors. Without doctors, the patients will never be seen and never be treated. We have about 900,000 physicians for a general population of 325 million here in the US in the year 2016. And as a side note, some YouTubers have more subscribers than there are physicians here in this country. Now, I get it. Clicking on subscribe on somebody's YouTube channel, which I think you should do for my channel, is much easier than becoming a physician. Actually, it's really hard to become one. So a lot of people don't know this, but after getting into medical school, which requires a 4-year degree, and satisfying all of their prerequisites, Then, after medical school, you have anywhere between 3 to 12 years of training to become a full attending physician, meaning that it could take anywhere from 12 to 20 years to become a full physician. We're blocking a lot of people who could potentially go in. What about somebody who's 35 or 40 years old and decides that they want to help patients and become a doctor or a physician? It's almost unfeasible for them to go through that system. You can't really wait 20 years of your life when you're 35 to become a physician. And interestingly enough, the system of medical education that we have today was dictated by a report that was commissioned in the year 1910 by somebody named Abraham Flexner. And he was sent by the Carnegie Foundation. Interesting enough that a billionaire is meddling in the affairs of medical education and thus affecting the lives of the common person. But in this report, which is also skeptical of women and black people becoming doctors, this is one of the main drivers of why we have such a physician shortage here in the United States today. And we still follow the recommendations that are put in this report. Why it's a problem is because it's produced a new division of labor amongst physicians. It used to be that physicians were also entrepreneurs, that they could be ones who could find unmet needs for patients and create companies in order to enhance the care for patients. And it wasn't just physicians, it was pharmacists, nurses, and chemists were able to start up medical device companies, surgical supplies, pharmaceutical companies. These were all open to people who were healthcare practitioners. Now the problem is that in today's world, we have a regulatory framework, and in order to get any kind of medicine or medical device passed, you have to go through billions of dollars of research and development, and you also have to go through a regulatory process. Overall, in 2016, even to get a drug passed through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which is the market gatekeeper to all medicines sold in the United States, it costs upwards of $2.5 billion and at least a decade worth of research and work. Back before the Flexner report was commissioned, healthcare practitioners could easily become entrepreneurs, but in today's world, they need an expertise outside of the clinical care that they deliver, which makes it nearly impossible for them to even go into the business aspect of things. Because part of the business of medical devices, which would be the Deus Ex augmentations, and even just getting drugs passed through and available on the market, you need to have regulatory expertise and business expertise, which doctors are not going to have. And this is a problem because instead of having doctors run things like medical device companies and drug companies, we have people like Martin Shkreli, who has zero medical training at all, running these companies. We have business people who are too busy with tax inversions or tax evasions. Then we have doctors working to improve patients' medical care. So yet another strike against why Deus Ex augs will never happen. Because simply the people who are in the trenches caring for the patients are now pigeonholed into a division of labor, which makes it almost impossible for them to come up with any new things that could help the patients' lives. All right, so now that I've talked about our healthcare system and who is in our healthcare system, the final link to why Deus Ex style augmentations are not going to happen in today's world is because of the medical device industry itself. All right, so I know I've mentioned the word medical devices a lot in this video already, and I want to give you the formal definition given to us by the World Health Organization. A medical device is an article, instrument, apparatus, or machine that is used in the prevention, diagnosis, or treatment of illness or disease, or for detecting, measuring, restoring, correcting, or modifying the structure or function of the body for some health purpose. That is the abbreviated definition of a medical device. Now, when we look at the medical device industry here in the United States, it is about 50% of the entire world's medical device market, with Western Europe at second place at just under a quarter of the entire world market. So in the year 2015, medical devices was a $148 billion industry. When we compare it to pharmaceuticals, which is $300 billion, and when we compare it to video games, which is $23 billion, we have something just about in between. Now, the problem with the medical device industry right now is that it's under a state of consolidation. And what does that word mean? Consolidation is a decreasing number of companies that live inside of a market. So in all of the medical devices that are being sold, there are now fewer companies now than there were 3 years ago selling these devices. And all the companies that exist now are bigger than they were back in 2013. It's pretty much like a game of Agario, where big fish eats kind of big fish and gets even bigger. Now, the question is, why does it happen? Why does consolidation in an industry happen? Now, there's a few reasons. First of all, the easiest one to see would be taxes, and any of the policies that come out of Washington, D.C. can affect any industry. And in fact, we see for medical devices, there was a 2.3% excise tax that was put on all medical devices, meaning that all medical devices that were sold here in the United States cost 2.3% more. We saw a fall in sales for medical devices after this tax was put into place, but it has been since put on hold and might come back again very soon. Now, the other reason why consolidation happens is regulation. We have the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which regulates medical devices. And most typically, companies have to apply for a PMA, or a pre-market authorization, in order to get their product out on the market. This isn't quite as bad as pharmaceuticals, which is even more heavily regulated, but just having this gatekeeper makes it so that winners and losers in the market are chosen on behalf of the government. We do it in the name of safety, but the outcome is that now we have an industry that's consolidating. Now, of course, industry consolidation also does happen naturally. When an industry is young, it's something called fractured, meaning that there's a lot of different companies doing a lot of different things, that the industry hasn't found its standards yet and is operating with great ingenuity. After all, when you're new at doing something, you're not quite as good at it until maybe after 10 years when you've been doing it every day, then you're very good at it. But the problem is that medical device market hasn't really matured. In a paper that was written by the National Institute of Standards and Technology on limb prosthetics, services, and devices, we find that prosthetics, which is a large component of medical devices, is actually just yet another fractured market. It hasn't matured that much. And overall, medical devices as an industry hasn't matured to the point where it should be consolidating right now. Also, compound on the fact that the entire healthcare system is becoming a drain on the entire US economy, with expenditures growing faster than the national income, we now have a problem. Because last year in 2015, two companies in the medical device industry named Medtronic and Covidien both merged, where one is a major seller of surgical supplies and the other is a major manufacturer of pacemakers. This merger happened for $49.9 billion, which is more than double of the entire video game industry, and these are just two companies merging together. So you have big consolidation happening here within medical devices. And why is that a problem? Well, the smaller companies tend to move faster. There's less bureaucratic paperwork to get through in order to get products passed out and get products ready for launch. Typically, in a smaller company, or when a industry is more fragmented, there's more ideas. And when you have more ideas and faster moving organizations, you're going to have more innovations come out of those. But when companies get too big, they become complacent. They hold more than 90% of the market. Those players in the market become complacent. New ideas are at a loss, and it makes it very difficult for advances to occur within that industry. It happens time and time again, and it's happening to the pharmaceutical industry, and you can go ahead and see that healthcare is going to pull the rug from underneath the US economy, and it's going to do it very soon. So now, my final point is this. In the original Deus Ex game, it mentioned consolidation and how it pulls human freedom away from the individual.
For 100 years, there's been a conspiracy of plutocrats against ordinary people.
Do you have a single fact to back that up?
Number one, in 1945, corporations paid 50% of federal taxes. Now they pay about 5%. Number two, in 1900, 90% of Americans were self-employed. Now it's about 2%.
So?
It's called consolidation. Strengthen governments and corporations, weaken individuals. With taxes, this can be done imperceptibly over time.
I find it paradoxical that a game that talks about stripping away human liberty through consolidation of power is depicting humans with augmentations, or machine-like modifications to their bodies, which will never happen because of that very consolidation, where we see a behemoth healthcare system begin to suck away all the resources from all of its citizens and put itself in a position to pull the rug out underneath from the entire economy. The richest country in the world is about to take itself down. And while the game has foresight into the future of humanity, it doesn't quite have the foresight on how its characters are simply not possible. Maybe, perhaps, there is no God in the machine, because that machine will never be merged with humans due to our faulty healthcare system, which is consolidating and stripping away individual liberties of people. So that is why, in my opinion, Deus Ex augmentations are simply just not possible in humans today. Technologically, we will be able to do it. Commercially, it will never be available to the masses. Now, I want to end this video with a few miscellaneous notes that I had that didn't quite fit in with my description of the healthcare system. First of all, there is Defense Department research here in the United States that show mind-controlled robotic arms. So technologically, yes, it will be possible, but commercially, it won't be. Because you know what's going to happen is that should any of those organizations who are researching these robotic arms commercially release a robotic arm or a robotic leg, all it takes is one incident for a misleading news organization story to come out, misinform the public about the potential evils of things like robotic arms. It's similar to what we see with misinformation spread about food and how we completely forget the fact that we now have prevented famine from ever happening in this country because of things like genetically modified food. And should a robotic arm that comes out of DARPA research ever become commercially available, it is then that we will see naturalists versus augs. So that might potentially be a reality. Anyways, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, or leave me a comment. Tell me if you disagree with me. Subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Adios, amigos.